Good morning, dear participants, and welcome to the plenary session. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker today, Professor Bert Scholtens, who is going to talk to us about corporate social responsibility in finance. Our speaker, although having spent almost his entire career as a professor in sustainable banking and finance at the Department of Economics, Econometrics and Finance at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. Furthermore, he is a finance professor at the University of St. Andrews, Scotland in the United Kingdom. Currently, he is visiting professor at Panthéon-Sorbonne in France. Professor Bert Scholtens studies and teaches international financial intermediation and environmental finance and economics. He teaches in courses about portfolio management, commodity finance, banking, responsible investing, corporate governance, and credit risk analysis, and supervises bachelor, master's, and PhD students. He specializes in studying the interaction between social and environment performance and financial performance at the level of firms and industries, as well as from a macro perspective. He publishes in international academic journals. Professor Bert Scholtens' research interests are in sustainable banking and finance, social responsible investing, international financial intermediation, and energy finance. Given the topic studied, he often works in a multidisciplinary setting. Please, Professor Bert Scholtens, present as your lecture. Thank you.
Bom dia. Thank you very much, Irene. I hope that you all can now see my slides.
Yeah.
And it is really my pleasure and honor to give this keynote at the Lisbon conference. The outline of my talk is as follows. First, I need really your input for my presentation. And I will come back to that later on during my presentation. I will briefly highlight recent news about CSR in finance and then try to delve deeper into corporate social responsibility first and finance second. Then I will discuss with you the what, the why, and the how of the interaction between corporate social responsibility in finance. And at the end, I will conclude. But first, I need your input. And for that, I would like you to go to a website, menti.com, and enter a code. I will now share my screen with you, which also has this code and also a link to this site. So bear with me. I will go there. So here there is the code, or you can use your smartphone to get the QR code. And the first question I'm having is that I would like you to rank 8 items regarding their relevance for CSR. So the code is 97002900. So the first question is that you need to rank 8 items regarding their relevance for corporate social responsibility. And you put on rank number 1 the item you deem most relevant. The current order is purely alphabetical. If you've done so, because there are leaders and laggards also among the participants of a conference, you can go to the second question, where you can assess 5 different statements on a Likert scale with 7 points. And last but not least, you can write a noun or a verb relating to what you regard as the key in the CSR finance relationship. But of course, it will take some time first for you to do this ranking. So I see the answers are coming in, but I will discuss them with you during the remainder of my presentation because I need your input to get going. And I will wait for another 2 minutes before I will continue. And I can assure you, for those who might be hesitant to fill this in, your personal view will not be disclosed at any time, and I am not able to find out which person gave what answer. So this is purely anonymous. I also use this a lot with my students, and that's why I also have this tool in my education. So I would now have to have 1 minute left for you to provide your answers. And then I will continue with my presentation. Okay, thank you very much. I will now continue with my presentation. And that is about the news about climate and finance. So, and I would argue that this is a very timely relationship, especially regarding the oil industry, the oil and gas industry in particular, and that faces major challenges in order to align with the Paris agreements. For example, the International Energy Agency has advised against capital expenditures in exploration and exploitation of any novel fields as from now. So far, the operations of and the actions and the policies of the oil majors have been far from sufficient to aligning with Paris agreements. For example, in this regard, a Dutch court recently ordered Royal Dutch Shell, one of the oil majors, to reduce emissions to live up to its corporate social responsibility. And also shareholder activism is on the rise, and these activists, among them Engine number one, even succeeded in appointing board members with ExxonMobil that aim at changing the traditional business model. At Royal Dutch Shell, activists followed this, got more than 30% of investor vote to overhaul their business model. So the relationship between CSR and finance is highly material and is super timely and relevant for the topics we research. Now, but what is corporate social responsibility? Well, corporate social responsibility, in fact, derives from the notion of sustainable development. And that is a concept which got, for the first time, broad exposure at the 1972 United Nations Environment Conference at Stockholm, which ended with the so-called Stockholm Declaration, an action plan for a human environment. In 1987, the World Commission on Environment and Development, the Brundtland Committee, defined sustainable development as the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Sustainable development implies economic growth together with the protection of environmental quality and reinforcing each other. The essence of this form of development is a stable relationship between human activities and the natural world, which would not diminish the prospect for future generations to enjoy a quality of life at least as good as our own. From this project, Our Common Future, the famous Rio 1992 conference resulted, and that translated into so-called Millennium Development Goals of year 2000, where 8 objectives were set to be achieved in 2015, and they were achieved. So that was a very good result. The Millennium Goals were succeeded by the Sustainable Development Goals, or the global goals of 2050. And I'm quite sure all of you are highly familiar with these. And so the collection of 17 interlinked global goals with 169 targets designed to be a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. The SDGs were set up in 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly and intended to be achieved by year 2030. They are mainly at a global and national level. So that makes it difficult to transform at a corporate level. So here I would like to point out that the academic literature already tried to work with the notion of sustainable development and relabel this as corporate social responsibility. Corporate social responsibility since the 1970s. So the catchphrase for sustainable development at the level of the firm or individual organization became corporate social responsibility. And here, Alexander Dalsroot came up with an overview of 37 studies which made an inventory of what was key to corporate social responsibility. And he came up with 6 key characteristics, namely that it should be voluntary by the corporation, it should focus on managing the corporation's externalities, it had a multiple stakeholder orientation, so no longer focus on the shareholder alone, it should align both social and economic objectives, it would be about values and practices, so performance, environmental and social performance was essential too, and it would go beyond mere philanthropy. Now, and I would like to compare this with your views as shown in our poll. So what do you think most important regarding CSR? Now, on first place, it ranks ethics. And then you have human rights, environment, and corporate governance, almost in the same position. And in fifth place is climate. And I would, from this poll of 30 participants, I would say that these five are the top five, and because the differential between number 5 and number 6, without doing any proper statistical analysis, is substantial. But ethics is most important by these poll. So if I compare that with the definition of Dolfroot, and so then he writes that it is also about social and economic alignment. It shows that this profits, you rank 6, is really important for corporate social responsibility. So that I would like to point out that in this subgroup of 30 participants, the role of economic performance is a bit underappreciated. So if you address corporate social responsibility, you should, I think it's important to really connect closely with financial performance too, in order to achieve a truly sustainable development at the level of the firm, which means that the firm, of course, also have to keep alive. And in our type of societies, it means that it also has to be profitable. If it is loss-making, it is not sustainable. But it should produce and have a business model which clearly balances the environmental, social, and economic performance of the firm. Okay, I'll continue with my presentation. So for corporate social responsibility, that notion became to be measured in the 1990s and early 2000s with so-called ESG rating agencies. For example, KLD, Kidder, Lidderberg, and Dominy, came up with a metric which accounted for environmental, social, and governance aspects of a corporation. So, and that turned out to become increasingly long list of issues that are put under this label of E, S, and G. And there are different rating agencies, Robeco SAM, MSCI, Sustainalytics, ISS, Refinitiv, Vigeo Eiris, which produce such ESG metrics. And we have reporting framework, like the Global Reporting Initiative and those of the Sustainable Accounting Societal Board. An issue of these ESG measurements is that they are hampered by some crucial problems because they don't point at this in the same direction, and as a result, they give conflicting guidance. For example, if you compare these ESG ratings with credit ratings by the likes of Moody's, Fitch, Standard & Poor's, such ratings clearly are highly correlated, and such correlation is much lower with these ESG ratings. And I would like to recommend you study the paper of Bert Kerbel and Riggebon about this. And their analysis shows that on average, differences in measurements, so how MSCI, Sustainalytics, etc., measure, that explains about 50% of the total differences in their ESG ratings. Further, also the scope of the notion of ESG is responsible for more than 40% of the differential in their ratings. So it shows that the raters, that is ESG rating agencies, disagree on the extent and on the definition of ESG, as much as they disagree on how the various aspects of ESG can be measured. Now, we go from corporate social responsibility to the other key constituent of my talk, and that is finance. So this is finance. And finance basically consists of two main areas of research. One is asset pricing and the other is corporate finance. Corporate finance tasks include making capital investments and deploying a company's long-term capital. Now, the capital investment decision process is primarily concerned with capital budgeting. Through capital budgeting, a company identifies capital expenditures, estimates future cash flows from proposed capital projects, and compares planned investments with potential proceeds, and decides which projects to include in its capital budget. There is a very wide bundle of theories about different funded sources, the structure of capital, the leverage, investment decisions. Let's think, for example, about the pecking order theory and about theories about agency problems. This contrasts with asset pricing, the other subset of finance. This uses one theory that is basically arbitrage pricing theory. And arbitrage pricing theory, or APT, assumes that an asset's returns can be predicted using the relationship between the asset's expected return and a number of macroeconomic variables that capture systematic risk. So these systematic risks, together with the firm-specific or asset-specific risks, together are responsible for the asset's expected returns. So I will now first go into corporate finance, how that works out in relation to corporate social responsibility, and then illustrate how this is moving on for asset pricing. So first, from the perspective of corporate finance. Now, responsibility then I will discuss in a minute. So first is capital expenditures. And so a corporation, in order to gauge the value, you have to account for the revenues and the expenses and discount against the risk. So you have capital expenditures that are the major purchases a company makes that are designed to be used over the long term. Next to that, you have the operating expenditures that basically are the day-to-day expenses of a company to keep its business going. And revenues is the income of the firm. Now, then I would like to point out that with corporate social responsibility, it is likely that expenses can increase because processes and value chains need to be transformed in order to make them more sustainable. However, they can also become smaller over time because of way more efficient use of resources. Revenues can drop for a responsible company if it shuns particular segments. However, consumers often are willing to pay a premium when the product is responsibly sourced. And all these affect the valuation of the firm. Then, from the investor perspective, responsibility of a firm is to be associated with a higher market value in relation to the book value of assets of the firm, market to book ratio. So that's why I put a plus over there. This is because the assets of a responsible firm are priced higher than that of an irresponsible firm for whose stock there is less demand. And so increasingly investors shun stocks from controversial industries like tobacco, gambling, alcohol, and coal, and maybe in the short term also oil and gas. Now, then from the corporate perspective, more responsible firms have a higher return on their assets. How come? Well, you should realize that responsible entrepreneurs do account for social damage, and they end up, therefore, with a higher cost of capital. With such a higher cost of capital, their investment of capital will be lower, but given decreasing marginal returns, the reduction in revenues is smaller than the reduction in capital. So, ceteris paribus, this means that their return on assets is higher than that of the irresponsible firm. Then this all comes together in the stock market return. So combining demand and supply side leads to the undetermined overall results regarding the profits per share of responsible vis-a-vis irresponsible firms, as both the market to book and return on assets of responsible firms and higher than those of irresponsible firms. So it's not possible to, on an a priori basis, to decide whether also stock market returns of a responsible company outperform or underperform those of irresponsible firms. Let's see what is recently going on in this field of asset pricing. Asset pricing in connection with corporate social responsibility has boomed as of recently. For a prolonged period, it is shown here in this graph, this starts with 2011, there was no, as predicted by our theoretical model, there was no significant statistical difference between portfolio returns of conventional and those of green or responsible or sustainable investments. However, in the recent period, starting with COVID-19, they appear to have outperformed. But I would like to warn you, this is unlikely to last. The global inflows, so this increase is also confounded by the steep increase in global flows into ESG funds. So this economist graph shows that these global flows into ESG funds topped almost $180 billion in the first quarter of this year, up from less than $40 billion in the first quarter of last year. Nowadays, ESG funds account for 25% of total fund inflows so far, and that's up from 10% in 2018. So this finance and responsible finance has become very interesting. And now I go back again to what you answered in your poll regarding what you feel about this relationship. Okay, now we can see here the distribution, and it shows that for the first question, on a 7-point scale, the average value is 5.5, but it's clearly the largest group, 12 participants say that they very strongly agree with CSR is crucial for finance. Now, if we compare that with the complementary question, finance is crucial for CSR, we see that this is halved, 12 here, 6 here, and the average also is much lower. And we also have a group here with participants who think that they disagree that finance is crucial for corporate social responsibility. It's clear that most of you think that they disagree with the statement that CSR and finance are unrelated. Is there a symbiotic relationship? Well, we see a bit of a bimodal, of a trimodal even distribution. And so we see four answers here, 5 here, and 7 here. So this is the group is very dispersed regarding whether there is a symbiotic relationship. This contrasts with the last question. And so clearly most participants, 11 out of 27, think there is strongly disagree with the view that there would be an antagonistic relationship between these two. Okay, so thank you very much for providing this information. I now return to my presentation. And discuss some stylized facts between CSR and finance. So the empirical evidence shows that usually there is a positive association between corporate social responsibility and corporate finance performance. However, this is only marginal significance. The studies use highly different metrics, methods, and samples. It also shows that the relationship is stronger for accounting than for finance metrics. And it's stronger for rating data, let's say the ESG ratings, of course, than for actual performance data. So it also shows that the causality mainly runs from financial to social performance. So that contrasts with some of the notions you had in the poll. which favor the other way around. However, in general, there is a bidirectional causality. So the causality goes both ways. It goes both ways, but the impact of finance on CSR is stronger, more prevalent than the other way around. Also, a stylized fact is that ESG investing is now, in fact, business as usual. So there is no investment house, there's no bank, there is no broker who does not offer ESG investing. However, the question that remains to be answered is how responsible, how impactful such ESG investing actually is, because that's the proof of the pudding, of course. Then why would there be such a relationship? So I want to point out that business and economics literature as such is not offering notions about this. And we need to have help from insights from social psychology to do so. And here there is a paper by Benabou and Tirole, which offers some of these insights. And they come up with three different motives. First is, firms will engage in corporate social responsibility because it helps them make profit. The second is that of delegated philanthropy, that is the shareholders want them to engage with corporate social responsibility. And the third motive, Benabou and Tirole observe, is insider-initiated philanthropy, whether it is the CEO or the board itself. Furthermore, CSR can be used to improve and protect corporate reputation, but also it is being used for greenwashing. And that is, the firms talk but don't walk. And that clearly is the dark side of organizations. Then how would they relate? Now, in corporate finance, you have to realize that responsible corporate social responsibility impacts on the cost of capital. And we find that there is a small but significant difference in favoring more responsible companies. There also is rationing, especially controversial industries find it much more difficult to get external funding. And also the risk properties are highly different. Regarding the asset pricing arena, it is taste and values of investors that increasingly drive their asset allocation. We also see different features in risk properties of the assets of responsible and irresponsible firms. And another important notion is that the investors with a longer horizon, longer investment horizon, that is, tend to have significantly more firms with better ESG performance in their portfolio. And that does not automatically mean that pension funds do so, because you should realize that pension funds also differ a lot regarding the actual horizon they need to have. Then I would come to the conclusion about CSR in finance, and I have 5 conclusions. First, that it is a complicated relationship. The direction can be positive, it can be negative, it can run from CSR to CFP and from CFP to CSR. But I want to point out it is at the heart of the business model. So the integration of addressing externalities is something what should happen within the operations and within the strategy of the firm. You should realize that it is capital which decides about what kind of sustainability the corporation aims at. At the same time, you should realize that sustainability objectives might guide the allocation of such capital. Increasingly, sustainability acts as a license to operate, of the firm. So these are the main features from my perspective, and I would now like to check this with what you appreciate about the relationship between CSR and finance. Okay, so we here have different answers, And apparently my instruction was not clear, type a verb or a noun, but don't worry too much. That's the same what my students do. So it shows also that words that are larger printed have been used more often. So with you, it is, what do you regard as key in the CSR finance relationship? It is ethic or ethics, as already came up before. It is sustainability. It is corporate governance. Also, there are several answers saying that is not a trade-off between the two, which is conflicted, disputed by a lot of empirical evidence. So we have purpose, durability, environment, responsibility, human rights, transparency, correlation, interdependent, mutual beneficent. Okay, but so I want to point out that it is not only positive, there can really be a trade-off there, and you should realize that doing good and doing well does not automatically relate to one another. It really depends upon how the business integrates CSR into its business model and how it affects the long-term strategy of the corporation. I would like to thank you who did participate in this poll very much for doing so. Okay, this is I would like to refer to you to the main papers I've been using. That is the paper of Ben Abou in Tirol about the motives to engage with corporate social responsibility at the individual level and at the level of the corporation. Second is the paper of Florian Berg, Julian Kolbel, and Roberto Rigobon about the divergence of ESG ratings and what is behind. Third is the paper of Alexander Balsroot about the definitions of corporate responsibility. And last is a paper of our own, with Jan Dan, where we try to arrive at a theoretical perspective, and we start from first principles and compare responsible and irresponsible companies. Well, that was my keynote. It was really a pleasure to prepare this. And I want to point out that finance and its relationship with corporate social responsibility is at the foundation of many of the studies that are being presented during this conference. Also, although they are not often being explicitly acknowledged. And I don't think I will be able to have turned you folk to go study finance, but I hope to have stimulated you to think about the relevance of finance and its importance for the study of CSR. I'd like to wish you a very fruitful and productive conference and look forward to be in touch with you on the interaction between finance and corporate social responsibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bert, so much for bringing us this fantastic world of finance to the digital conference today. We have still 20 minutes left to ask some questions. And yeah, I see it's like you that finance is now heavily engaged in the field of CSR, sustainable management. It seems to become one of the main drivers in the sustainable business transformation. And thank you also for showing us all the studies and the figures and facts from a financial perspective. I also would like to say hello to all the participants. So I think the most important is that we can meet healthy. And of course, I've been traveling to Lisboa quite often, and I already can feel the Lisboa spirit, even if it's a digital conference. So thank you, Irene, for making this possible. We now have the possibility for everyone to ask some questions, to maybe even challenge some of the facts and figures. Maybe we see different studies. As you were saying, we have many also sessions in this conference related to finance, which I think is very good because finance is at the core of every business. Maybe I start with a question so that everyone else has some possibility to think and write it into the chat function. And we get some interesting questions. My first question would be that you said that there's also some studies challenging the idea of overcoming the trade-off. And you said it's not that sustainability per se is also making profit. It very much depends on the mindset of, and also the business model and the integration of sustainability. Can you maybe say a little bit more from a financial perspective? What are the 3 points for a business? How should business integrate sustainability, CSR, into their business model in order to get those positive effects you were mentioning, maybe a positive alpha or some better returns on the stock markets, a higher market value? What would be the strategic management decisions a CEO needs to take into consideration to make or to overcome the trade-off between sustainability and profitability? Maybe you can explain a little bit more in this direction, and then we hopefully get more questions from the audience.
Thank you very much, René. Unfortunately, there's no blueprint for how to become a sustainable company and be profitable. And we see a lot of new startups and with great ideas, and that's very pleasant to have, but we should realize already that many of these startups will not turn into Alphabet, will not turn into Tesla. But that's how it is. Important for management and for owners of the firm is that they should realize they want to have really a business case, and that the business case can be very well be one that not only has financial impact, but also has societal or environmental impact. And that can, I think it is in many cases better to do so from at the level of the innovation of a startup than to turn around existing businesses, because they are often highly bureaucratic and become very very resistant to change, because they have lots of vested interests and they have enormous lobby power, whereas the creativity of entrepreneurs in startup is much more open and much more focused often, and not that bureaucratic. So it should really be integrated into the business model, and the corporation should have a clear idea about where to go. If, for example, it's very difficult to achieve all 70 sustainable development goals, and you're more exposed or more sensitive to some of these. And there, it is very important to, as with in the finance arena, to have clear milestones you want to achieve over time. Sustainability is not a yes/no process, but it really is a process. So you're not sustainable or unsustainable, but you're on your way to become more sustainable. So you should set these milestones very, very clearly, and also be informed by science-based evidence. And therefore, I think there's also an important role for scientists to reach out, because this is not competitive at all. So there's one planet, and maybe very rich people can go to the moon or to Mars, but life on Mars sucks, I would say. So life on planet Earth is much better, and it's much more efficient from a social and economic point of view to manage Earth's resources well, to keep them sound for future generations. So that is where businesses should focus at, so that they want to last. Businesses should be built to last for future generations. And if entrepreneurs keep that in mind, that really helps them. So they should not focus on quarterly earnings of this year, but also 30 years and 50 years from now. And if that sets into their mind, that I think is the most important driver. I say the longevity. The longevity is the most important characteristic of sustainable business.
Okay, 2019, just before the pandemic started, 181 CEOs of the largest US companies were proposing that they have to, or they go for a new business mindset, for a new paradigm, though they questioned whether the real goal is really to maximize profit, or it's more about purpose and positive impact. And they were quoting publicly that they say that the purpose and positive impact of a company in the future will become more important than the short-term profit orientation. And it was quite interesting because it comes from a society which is well known as shareholder value friendly, so to say. And now I have the first question from Patrick Bungard related to this. How does this new business paradigm proposed by the CEOs that social environmental impact, the positive impact of a company becomes more important, relate to also customers, employees, society, to the stakeholders? How can we better integrate the stakeholder dimension in the strategic management? And how is this linked to economic performance? And how can we gain new insights? You mentioned a lot of studies, but how can we now bring this, I think it's coming from business itself, this new paradigm more also to the academic world? How can academics contribute for this large transformation ahead?
Yeah, thank you. I also follow this this statement from that meeting with great interest. First, you have to realize that a paradigm is not made up by some CEOs, but as I would first say that this is, to a great extent, this is reputation management. And so there were lots of leaders of companies who are not taking care very well of their employees, and whose supply chain is, at least to say, problematic in different parts. So first they should walk the talk and do what they say. It is also a defensive move because increasingly investors, also in the US, saying for example, CalPERS, require companies to disclose first what they are doing and how they are operating, and ask them or instruct them to change their business model. So I think that was a clear example of reputation management by these business leaders, because they did not really change, and that cannot be expected that they do so overnight. So they will really have to reallocate their capital expenditures to align financial and social objectives. And the bottom line, Renee, and also Patrick, who asked the question, is about the license, that sustainability is a license to operate, because increasingly employees don't, especially new recruits, will not want to work with a corporation that is tarnished by all types of incidents and controversies, and customers, especially in more mature economies, are willing to pay the premium for products that are responsibly sourced. So that now happens in the US, that happens in Germany, that happens in Portugal, and increasingly is happening in China too. So the license to operate, that is what they should keep in mind instead of managing their reputation.
Okay, I see that there's still a lot of discussion going on, and you mentioned China. So this would be also very interesting. Is the financial world having the same perspective? Are people in the United States, Europe, Asia thinking the same direction? Or would you say there is differences from the investors in Asia, Europe, and the United States? Or is it the whole global investor community which are now bringing in these issues to the C-level?
I don't, of course, there are a lot of differences between individual investors. That's for sure. Whether there are persistent, significant difference between a Chinese investor and a investor from Cameroon and one from Cyprus, I would not dare to claim, because you should realize that their portfolios consist of is a global portfolio. Of course, there always is the home country bias, but the investments in the US, in China, in Cyprus, in Cameroon, they are being considered by investors from other countries. So that really is a global market. So, and also you should realize that so the way the social system operates in China is very different, of course, from that in Portugal, in Germany. But these people living there have the same concerns as people in Portugal and Germany have. It's also about the well-being and they are also concerned about their children and their grandchildren. So that is what us unites, and that is what really should matter, I'd say.
I think this is a very good last remark. We have people from all over the world, nearly 50 countries here participating in this conference. Thank you very much. I think we still have 3 days left to discuss all the arguments you brought up in different sessions. And I will now hand over to Irene again for the next steps towards the conference. Thank you, Bert, for being with us. It was like always great talking to you. And you were already in the beginning saying that you like hiking, being in the nature, but unfortunately cannot skate on the Dutch canals anymore due to climate change. So it's basically in all of our interest to do something against climate change, but also keep our planet safe. And I think finance plays a very, very important role. So keep going, talking and convincing other financial departments, bringing sustainability to the core of academic analytics and also the discussion with the investors, very important. This brings really a lot of support to the global ethical community and sustainability community. Thank you for that. And I hand over to Irene now. Thank you very much, Bert.
Thank you, René. And thank you, Professor Bert, for your great presentation and plenary sections. And thank you for all of you. And we continue with this session in this close this section, and we have parallel sections following these plenary sections. And great conference for all of you. Thank you to all. Bye-bye.